Now we turn to the opposite side of the argument. Brian, Sapient and Kelly will tell us why they don't believe that God exists. Brian.
Thank you, Martin. Actually, just to make a brief correction, I'm not here to tell you why I don't believe God exists. I'm here to tell you why I believe he failed at his premise to prove that God exists scientifically without invoking the Bible. Most of us know that 10 Commandments are in the Bible, so we probably should leave the building right now. The 10 Commandments were used wholly here as part of his proof. However, he brings up some points. He says that we see this building, we know there was a builder. We see a painting, we know there was a painter. He forgets that we can call the builder of this church. We can check New York City permit records. We can't call God to go visit his universe factory. We can call the painter. We can call the paint maker. We can go to the car factory, but can Ray take us to God's factory to watch creation in action? Ray also talks about how, and this is, seriously, I wasn't even going to touch on the Bible at all. I wanted to be all science today. But he mentions that pedophiles and murderers and Hitler are all going to go to hell. However, as you may all well know from the blasphemy challenge, Jesus said all sins should be forgiven of man except blasphemy of the Holy Spirit. So pedophiles, murderers, as long as you're Christian in prison, you can feel safe. If you truly believe this, and it's true, you will go to heaven. Now let me address the arguments that I was expecting from Ray, which he did bring up points of. He claims all creations must have a creator. There's just a huge gaping hole in this argument. It's so obvious, it really doesn't warrant an answer, but most simply put, if all creations need a creator, then what created God? And was that God's God? And was that God's God? Just, you know, anti-scientists like Ray make claims of intelligent design, yet everywhere we look, we see the evidence of a system that wasn't intelligently designed. I have nipples and mammary glands. We have a blind spot in the human eye, which he thinks is perfect, but yet the image is sent to our brain backwards. Our ecosystem depends on life, killing life in order to survive. Snakes have legs that they don't use, which is a remnant of their evolutionary past and proof that they weren't designed intelligently. What contribution to mankind has religion delivered in the same time frame where science has contributed immeasurably? And is any contribution even remotely comparable? What contribution has religion given that atheists can't or haven't given? Atheists have given blood, donated money without threats of hell to the beneficiaries, fed the starving, built houses, and innumerable other acts of goodwill. Now, while I may seem harsh today, I assure you that outside of this setting, I, like most other atheists, are good and compassionate people. One doesn't need religion to be a good person, and religion doesn't make somebody a good person. Atheists are your doctors, teachers, firefighters, policemen, and war heroes. And if you're familiar with Ray's arguments, we have to deal with being told that we don't even exist. Atheism is merely the absence of belief in any God. We are all born as atheists. We must be taught to be theists. And as an agnostic atheist, I am not making an absolute claim that no God exists. I am making an absolute claim that today I don't have a belief in one. And I'm sorry that Ray's arguments didn't help change my mind. And I'll now turn the time over to my partner, Kelly, who will address these a little more scientifically and philosophically.
Hi there. I would just like to reiterate that our purpose here is solely to show that Ray and Kirk cannot prove their God, the God of Christianity, using scientific methods. We are atheists. Atheism is a lack of a belief. So I'd just like to remind all of you that you are atheists, just like Ray and Kirk are, when it comes to Zeus, Apollo, Thor, or any other of the countless imaginary people that we've come up with throughout human history. So, the best evidence that Ray's God doesn't exist is the refutation of his claims. So, we're going to start out with the definition of science. Science is the testing of explanations against the natural world. Science is transparent, which means that anybody can look up these tests, they can read about the methods and the results for themselves if they're so inclined. Nobody's hiding this. The real beauty of science is that it's revisable. Science is continually changing with the addition of new information, unlike dogmatic belief, which doesn't. Scientific experiments use two different forms of methodology. First is direct. A direct experiment would be something like what you see on a TV infomercial when they want to prove that their product is better than another one. The other method of experimentation is indirect. It follows a line of questioning similar to, if this thing is true, then one would expect to find this thing out there existing in nature, or would expect to not find this other thing. This is the category of experimentation that evolution fits into. Intelligent design is not science precisely because it is impossible to test it in that way. God exists outside of the natural world, not to mention the fact that an omnipotent creator who could do anything would negate science completely. We would live in a world of magic where you could turn on the light switch and, well, maybe it'll turn on and maybe it won't because, hey, it's magic. So unless Ray can prove how his God created the universe, take us to the universe factory, show us his methods, and explain them to us, it simply is not science. Ray uses creation to support his God. First of all, the question is phrased to solely support Ray's God concept. The reality is that an ultimate creator is no more likely to be Yahweh than the flying spaghetti monster. The perfection of the universe. I mean, it's a completely ridiculous statement because we wouldn't be here to observe it if it were otherwise. That's not proof of any kind of creator. It's just proof that it is. Ray claims that God is the first cause. God is exempt from ordinary logic and rational existence as we know it. How convenient. Again, magic can be used to explain, anything, absolutely anything. So right off the bat, not only does Ray's God hypothesis fail to meet the standards of science, his whole basis for belief in his God is really exposed for the intellectual dishonesty that it is. Ray's next argument relied on the conscience. If we're all made with this inbuilt conscience, why do parents bother to teach their children anything? Wouldn't they just know? What about sociopaths and murderers? God forgot to install their consciences? The fact is that conscience and morality are the result of thousands of generations of parents and societies passing these teachings on to their children. This is necessary not only for society to function, but also for successful gene proliferation. The apparent similarities throughout time can be simply explained by the fact that all humans seek pleasure and avoid pain. The presence of immoral people no more proves the need for Ray's God than the existence of Ted Haggard disproves his God. Ray spent a good deal of time on the 10 Commandments from the Bible that we weren't supposed to be discussing tonight. What he's doing here is trying to manufacture a problem which only his God can fix. Well, the first question I would ask is, well, which version of the 10 Commandments are we using anyway? We've got Exodus 20, Exodus 34, Deuteronomy 5. We're going to have to settle on which version we're going to even talk about first. The first 3 or 4 of the commandments, depending on the version, are just all about worshiping God. So if these laws are all written on our hearts, explain the abundance of other religions where people worshipped other gods before Yahweh, if we all knew that that's what we were supposed to be doing anyway. And while we're on the subject of other religions, what about like the 5 pillars of Islam?
Brian and Kelly, thank you.